And we appreciate it that you chose our session. My name is Sayyid Abdullah Shahrukhni. I'm a PhD student at Washington State University.
And I am Mohammed Al-Faiz. I'm adjunct faculty at Washington State University.
Our presentation, as you know, is about the process of second language socialization in a strategic online game. So we start off with an activity, and then we'll attend to the theoretical framework of the study, and then we transition to the study, and finally we'll wrap up with the question and answer section of the presentation.
So Said and I are actually new presenters at TESOL convention, and we are so amazed by this academic zeal. We see people from all over the world who have gathered to share their scholarly findings. Well, since we are new members here, I have a question. What are the norms, principles, or ideas that we need to know and do in order to be competent members of this group, of TESOL group? What are some kind of norms, ideas? So what I want to do right now is for 2 minutes, I want you please to find a partner, work for 2 minutes, and try to find ideas to help us be competent members of TESOL community. Thank you.
TESOLer, yes.
I don't know how that's going to stream. Maybe, let's see. No problem. No problem. That's all right. What, your name is Mohammed? And let's see, I met Abdullah the other night. I work with him on the TESOL EJ.
And so I had a good time with you guys.
Okay. So what we're doing here, all these videos that we're taking are going on to HowIOS.tvworks.com website. And I don't have the selfie thing down to get to people, but now I'm getting it there. So. Anyways, so we're, putting stuff online that we can capture here. And you'll be able to see this later, right after your presentation.
That'd be great.
No, I work in the United Airways. Yeah, you both see Higher College of Technology.
Of course, in English as a language, right? Okay. I really enjoyed this class.
Okay, thank you for the brief interview.
We had to ask a question, actually. Are you talking about being, participating in this convention, or being a
TESOL English as second
In the
language.
community.
teacher?
Yes, community.
Okay.
Teaching, English as second
And
language.
are you interested in teaching adults or kids or high school students?
Adults.
Or
Wherever you choose, that's okay. You want to choose adults or kids, whatever. All right, 2 minutes is gone. All right, can I share answers, please, now? Okay. Any brave soul here? Can you please share your answers here? Some advice, yes?
We got two facets. One is general convention going, like understanding how exhibits work and workshops work and how to navigate the 3 buildings that we have to be in and all the rooms and floors, and understanding the program. And then 2, the understanding TESOL itself, or the fact that we're in an ELL-centric community of individuals who are either teaching or administrating, researching, ELL individuals or some form of that.
Perfect. Thank you. Else?
Travel funds.
Travel fund. Yes. Cheers. Anything else here?
In the more general category here, it's you have to be open to other people's communities and their cultures, and accept their ideas, or at least try to be understanding of them at the very least.
Absolutely. This is the main thing, actually. Thank you so much, guys, for your sharing here. So, in other words, in order to affiliate to a group, we need to share the same goals, the norms, the principles to position ourselves as legitimate members of this community. This actually takes us to the definition of second language socialization. All right, so according to Sheffield and Ock, individuals become competent members of social groups and the role of language through this process. What it means here is that this process explains how individuals become competent members in a group. It also explains how learners' identities as language learners evolve through group participation. This second language socialization is actually a first language acquisition, actually. It relies on social learning, social theories of language learning, which actually, the main thing here is legitimate peripheral participation by Lave and Winiger. Sorry, this word is so hard to pronounce. Okay, please forgive me. Okay. All right. So, in other words, in this process, people co-construct new knowledge, and they acquire new ideas through participation and socialization with a group or in a group. In this process, also less competent people or members become more competent people, and then later they pass their knowledge onto new members. Also, so I know that you have a question right now. Okay, how does this relate to language socialization? Or what are the elements or the factors that lead to language socialization and learning? Well, first we're going to watch a short video, and then we are going to talk about these important elements.
Thanks very much. Sorry, we just have.
The next challenge for our team to solve is a puzzle. So here we go. A man has returned from the market where he's bought three things. He's bought a wolf, perhaps they're on sale, who knows, a turkey, and he's also bought a bag of grain. Now, on the way home, he must cross a river, but the boat can only fit in one thing at a time. So, he can't leave the turkey with the grain because it will eat it. Likewise, he can't leave the wolf with the turkey. How is he going to get all three things across the river? Team, it is up to you to solve the problem.
I love these sort of puzzles. Okay, so I reckon we just jump in and get some ideas flowing. So what do you guys got?
Oh, I really like these sorts of problems too. I read about this technique that you can use to solve these sorts of things. I'd really like to give it a try.
Look at this logically. We have a man, we have a wolf. A man and a wolf can be together. Look, boom, you're over there. You can't just do that. You have to think these things through logically. The turkey and the grain were still together.
You want to hear that technique that I read about?
Yes, Kelly.
Okay, it's basically a process of elimination. You try out a combination and then you exhaust all the possibilities, and then you move on to another combination.
I reckon that's going to take forever. So I reckon we just have a crack, jump in, and see what happens. No, with Julie, we work through the combinations. We'll eventually get to the right thing again. Maybe you can alter slightly. Put in.
Yeah, well, I've been listening to everything that you're saying and trying to understand all your different perspectives, but I'm not one for taking risks, so I'm not so much with you, Scott. I didn't feel like I wanted to just jump in. But I was thinking that maybe if the man takes the turkey across, first of all, and then goes back to get the grain, okay, so then he leaves the grain there but takes the turkey back with him, see, and he could take the wolf across, leave the wolf there, and then go back and get the turkey. So yeah, I think that would work.
That's it. Well done, Amy. Well, it's always the quiet ones you have to watch. Congratulations. You get to have the turkey.
And the wolf
Is mine.
So I guess this is kind of like a famous puzzle here in America, right? Oh, okay, because when I first came here, my American friend, of course, asked me this question, and it took me like hours and hours to figure out, and I couldn't. So, in this group dynamic, if you notice this group, every member of this group, they have, they have shared goal, one goal, which is solving the problem, which is solving the puzzle. They interacted with one another. There's kind of like social interaction during the when they are solving the problem. Also, they were scaffolding one another. Everybody was giving some kind of scaffolding. And of course, there was negotiating meaning, which is solving the problem. The main thing here is everybody was giving and receiving feedback. These elements are very, very important in any social dynamic, in any group dynamic. If you look carefully at these elements, you will see that we actually use these elements when we communicate or we interact with any group, okay? And if you go back to our question, the question I gave you at the beginning, you will see that we have one goal, we ask questions, we receive and get feedback, okay? So I will leave the rest of the presentation for Said, who's going to talk about the study. Okay, thank you.
Very much. Well, thank you very much, everyone. The study we conducted was actually in the context of a game, so which is also a kind of group work activity in which everybody has a goal, and the goal is to dominate the world. So, and everybody needs to be participating in the communal goal of the whole game. So the setting was the game Stronghold Kingdoms, which is a multiplayer online game. So the methodology we adopted in our study was narrative inquiry. So because we thought that the best way to see what's going on inside a game is to listen to the stories told by the members of the game community. So the participants in our study were one language learner or gamer, which we consider as the protagonist of the study. So, and we had 4 English-speaking gamers. The data sources we employed in our study were records, chat threads, messages exchanged over chat while the participants were playing, and we conducted interviews with the protagonists of the study, and we had a focus group with the other 4 English-speaking gamers. So the research questions of the study were, what can be learned about the process of second language socialization from the stories of participants in an MMOG? So we were listening to their stories, actually. And the second question was, what are the linguistic norms and practices in the game community of practice? So with these questions, we approached the study. But before we continue to the study results, let's see what a language learner and a gamer have in common. According to G 2003, both language gamer and a gamer and a language learner need to master semiotic domain, which is a new language. So they both need to participate in an affinity group. They need to commit to learning. So it involves a process of committed learning for both types of members of the community. So both need to develop an identity. The gamer needs to develop a gamer identity. The language learner needs to develop a linguistic identity or a language identity. Both go through an ongoing learning process without psychosocial moratoriums. They fail. There might be failures, there might be problems, but it's also free to try. And in both learning processes, there are various modalities. In a game, there are videos, there are images, there are sounds. For a language learner also, these modalities exist. And finally, through both group activities, the 2 types of learners actually develop cultural models through interaction with other interlocutors. So these are the 4 instances of MMOGs for language learning according to G 2003. So in the game community of practice, the Stronghold Kingdoms, of course we're not condoning any game or any, it's not about a particular game. Game is only a setting and only a tool that we investigated because of our positionality and our past experiences. So let's see the game trailer for now, see what the game entails and what the gamers actually experience throughout their gameplay.
Greetings, sir. Your kingdom awaits. Stronghold Kingdoms. Your village is one of 1,000 others. Make it the pride of the parish. Plan and construct your settlements to maximize their potential. Use special cards to your advantage. Tailor-make your personal avatar. Explore new disciplines to gain the upper hand. Everything from salt working to siege mechanics. Hundreds of quests and achievements to challenge and reward you. Gather your forces, fight for glory, and dominate the land. Can you handle the pressure? Build the ultimate stronghold. Ready your defenses. And prepare for a medieval strategy experience unlike any other.
All right, thank you very much. So, as you just watched, so the game is actually a community of practice. So, in order to survive in this battle, in this challenge, players need to band together and they need to coordinate action. They need to communicate with each other so that they can.
Sorry, I know you're having Q&A later, but could you tell us a little bit about the age of the participants?
Yeah.
Or how you selected the
Sure.
people?
Sure. In the next slide, we have a section on participants.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, so let's move on to the next slide. So, so the participants in the game were actually a Serbian protagonist. The reason we chose him was the fact that he was not a native English speaker, so he needed English to communicate with other gamers. He was playing an English world, so in which every other member of the community were speaking in English. So he had to develop the linguistic skill required to communicate with those co-players. So another reason was his rank in the game. So the game potentially houses 1 million players. So he was the 16th member of the game. I mean that he was a very professional, competent member of the game. And he had many awards, 218, had completed 196 quests, had 40 villages, which was the maximum number of villages a player could have. And he had different social roles in the game. He was a faction leader, he was a sheriff, he was a steward. So, and he had played the game for 5 years, so he was recognized as a very competent player of the game. So the reason we chose him in our study was mainly because he as a non-native English speaker, it required a lot to reach this position in the game. And the other faction, the other participants in the game were actually faction members of this protagonist. So they had played the game for more than 2 years. So all of them were native English speakers, one from UK, the others from US. They had also social roles. They were less important roles in the game. They were steward positions, but they were considered social roles. And as you know, as you can see, the ranks in the game was lower compared to higher compared to the protagonist of the story. So Emil, the Serbian participant of our study, was the one we actually listened to see how the process has taken him to the place he was. Eric, Jen, and Jack were the players. We actually invited them to a focus group and listened to their stories about Emil, the faction leader, to see if he actually is considered by the faction members as a competent player of the game. So the results of open and actual coding of 232 in-game forum threads, which comprise 1,241 messages, led to this finding that almost 33% of the chat messages in the game were related to some form of communication and coordination of action. Around almost 23% of the chat messages were about gaming skills, and 16% of the messages were about code of conduct, how players should act in the game to be considered a good comrade, good player, good co-player. And around 15% were about dedication to the game. So in the next slide, we're going to show you what the categories, individual codes and categories of these themes were. And finally, about 13% of the messages were about some real life issue. So as you can see, communication and coordination were among the highest concentration of messages. So and of course for other four concepts or themes in the study, we need communication to achieve those too. It's not about just communication alone. So these 5 concepts or themes were the norms of the community where the players needed to affiliate to, they needed to stick to. So as with communication and coordination, we learned that different peace or wartime communication or coordination channels like social threads, activity threads, supply threads, Munkin support thread, sending proclamations, negotiations, sending mass invitations, recruitment of players, discussing strategies. So we're part of the, their communication and coordination commitments of the players in peacetime or wartime times. So some of the chat messages were about arranging some form of third-party audio chat type of communications, which there were frequent references to TeamSpeak, Discord, Raid Call, Facebook to coordinate action, especially in times of war, where the participant needed to be actively engaged and be they needed to send and receive messages very quickly to survive in the atmosphere of war. And also there were references to high-profile communication or coordination efforts at different levels, faction leaders, house generals, parish stewards, county sheriffs, province governors, and country kings, alliances, etc. So, as to the second theme, what made a player a skillful player, there were also categories and involved in the process, how we could decide if a player had the required skills to be called a competent player. So it was usually based on their position in the leadership board. So it was about peacetime actions, so having a strong economy, building fortifications, and etc. And being a warrior was considered an important theme, an important category in our data analysis, in our findings. So performing timed attacks, being a breaker, supplier, monker, combo player, defending against timed attacks, pillaging, ransacking, and all the technical skills which was required to be considered a competent, a skillful player. So the third concept in our findings were about being honest, which was about the code of conduct. So having no alternative accounts, respecting leadership, so adhering to leadership decisions about the location of active players' villages, capturing villages only by permission. So all of these required actually some form of communication to be honest, to respect the leadership, to send messages back and forth with different authorities in the game. So responding to the activity checks within 2 to 3 days, contact participations in elections, constant participation in elections, and supporting other members. They were also considered to be the responsibilities of active or competent players in the game. And dedication also was about being active. Being active meant donating goods to the parish, worm-tie active coordinated efforts, voting, greeting newcomers, and coaching them, sharing the strategies, collaborating on communication threads, protecting other players' assets in their absence, cleaning the parish of disease points regularly, and dealing with rogue players. So it constituted dedication. If a player was dedicated, so he or she should have been good at all these subcategories. And finally, some real-life issues. Non-game issues included daily life, relationships, politics, pets, music, technologies, etc. So these findings were all emerged from our analysis of the chat threads or forum threads. And later on, based on these categories, we approached the players, other participants of the study, and just conducted interviews and focus groups with them, and which we're here presenting some of their results with. So the results of the study. So we learned that non-native English speakers need to develop a functional linguistic proficiency throughout the game. And here is some evidence from Jen. So Jen says, I think that people can play the game in isolation, but if you will get bored. To stay for a long time, you need to feel part of a team. And to do that, effective communication is key. So it was to the question if a non-native English speaker can, or Emil, as the protagonist of the story, can lead the others, despite the fact that his English proficiency was not accurate, and there were frequent grammatical mistakes, grammatical errors in his messages. So the second finding of this study was non-native English speakers adopt a variety of strategies to function effectively in the game and use their game skills to compensate for the lacks in their linguistic skills. Here we have some excerpts from Emil's response to this question, that how can you be a faction leader? So he says, when I started to play, I was not that much open for communication with other people. What will or can I speak with them? From where are they? Will I understand them? Where some of the questions? But as the time has passed, I was more and more communication with people. Now I'm involved as a house general in about 15 active threads, and I get a lot of mails. Also, I use Google Translate option sometimes. It gives few words for one in Serbian, so I look for one that looks better in use, and I see also how it is being written. As you can see, there are grammatical mistakes and spelling mistakes, grammatical mistakes, all forms of grammatical mistakes in Serb, but he manages to still lead the faction and be the main player in the faction. So another piece of evidence was through the assumption of social roles in the game, non-native English speakers attempt to actively engage in adopting target language forms to perform the duties effectively. And we got some evidence from Emil too. He says, a social role for me means to be the kind of person who likes to talk to others and engage with them, perhaps over a chat server like TeamSpeak or Discord. still another evidence is native speakers tend to discard the non-native English speakers' ill-formed linguistic constructions when the player is skillful in the game. As long as the player is skillful, so it doesn't matter if the linguistic forms are ill-formed. And we have evidence from Eric. So playing online games means interaction with people of other languages, and I figured out that just asking for the meaning if you don't understand the meaning is the best way to communicate. You always find a way to speak together. And finally, both writing and audio chat applications are preferred means of communication for both native English speakers and non-native English speakers. So Emil, for example, says, I was more active in TeamSpeak in the past, but now I don't have time for it. Plus, my kids are making noise, so I can't communicate with people in there. And Jen, the female participant of the study, says, I love Discord. Discord is a third-party application for gamers. So I love Discord. I can't believe how I managed to be on many text threads before. And Jack, so all the conversations were happening in the textual mode of the Discord. So, and Jack says, you're texting now too. So it was all text.
So they didn't use the voice?
Yeah, of course they did, but not for the purpose of the focus group. So we were typing.
Okay.
4 of us were typing at the same time. Oh, we have one more. And the social relationships in the game tend to extend to other non-game situations. So we have an expert from the focus group. I will miss you all when the world ends, mostly. So the game we were playing was about to end. So, and Jack says, don't even talk stuff like that. And Eric says, I'm playing this game lately only because of other players, not because of game itself. And Jen says, in another, it's another piece of evidence, that I have lasting friendship that have spanned nearly 10 years, one resulting in a mid-long-term relationship of a different caliber. So social relationships do not stay just in the game, just pass on to other non-game settings. All right, and then we're done with our presentation. If there are any questions, we'll be more than happy to. Of course.
I know you're dreading my question, Say, but so what's the big so what? What are you trying to tell us about what our students should do or what we should do as teachers? The thing that most concerns me here, by the way, I like the way you changed your questions and things, is that you said that the native speakers discard the mistakes so that they're not really modeling maybe, or they're not really helping the non-native speakers linguistically. So what do you think about that?
Oh, it's not, thank you very much for the question, first, and thanks for taking the time to come to our presentation, Dr. Egbert.
Of course.
In the game community, action is important. So as long as a player can get the message across and only communicate and is able to communicate proficiently about the gaming strategies, the gaming goals. So it suffices. That's true. But there are times when other players also try to, they pick up language from the communications of other players of the game. So Emil, for example, the protagonist of the story, as you can see, is able to produce some language. And it's true that there are still problems in it, but he apparentises to the language that is produced by other native English speakers of the game, and that's probably what we want in our classes too. That we are exposing them to input, and we expect them to uptake, to take from the correct grammatical, grammatical languages we expose them to, and develop the linguistic repertoire that we want them to have. So it's not always ill-formed. Probably it hasn't been like this before. Probably has changed through time to get to this state. So, and it probably will lead to more learning.
Do you have that data about him 5 years ago and him now?
Oh no, I don't have that. Yeah, but that's good to dig in and contact him for that data. Thanks.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Quick question, like, we saw some of his grammar and spelling and surface level errors.
Sure.
What about like meaning issues, like where his teammates, especially, it sounds like they're all subordinates? Like, what, did any of those instances happen where he's trying to get a message across and it's lost somehow? And what does that look like and what happens next?
I have actually, we had lots of data that we couldn't include in our presentation, but we are going to publish a paper of the findings of this study. You may contact us for the data or the paper, hopefully in the future if you're interested. But there are times when misunderstanding happens actually. So it's normal. But in the game community of, you know, in the game, as long as you're around for a while, so you know how things go. So the main things are not lost. So maybe surface level types of miscommunications happen, but the general idea is the same. The language is fixed, or almost. You know the language of pillaging, you know the language of raising, you know the language of supplying. These communicative acts. You know how to ask for favors. You know how to challenge someone. How to do all game-related, challenges and quests. So, but there certainly are some miscommunications. Thank you.
Did Emil ever use English in the real world? Like, was he practicing? Was he in a class? Or, what did he use English for outside of the game at all?
So he was actually in another in another excerpt, in another another piece of evidence. He said that he has been learning English from elementary school, since elementary school, and he used it all around him. That's what I'm quoting. So the language is in English, the books are in English. So, and we need English to communicate. That's not just a game. So according to him, he considers his writing to be developed specifically in the game, while his the speaking skill has stayed the same mostly. That's according to Emil and our conversations. But for sure, Serbia is a country where, according to Emil, people travel to, and he can find native English speakers to communicate with. Sure.
Thank you for the presentation. I think it was very thought-provoking. I really believe in games for learning, and I'm making an attempt to design a strategy game for business English myself with English language learning content, but it's an immersive story like this with some fewer rules, not so much freedom. And my question is, if you were to use a strategy game like this for teaching, do you have any suggestions of how you could create, like a project on the side, or how would you use this game in your classroom?
I personally do not. Thanks very much for the question.
Yeah.
So I personally won't use this game in my classroom because it condones the concept of a hierarchical society. So, and there are specific norms about it to be adopted by several papers, all the participants. For example, when they approach a leader, they need to use the language. So my lord or my lady, or so we don't want that in our classes. But the whole notion of challenge, interaction, engagement, these are all about. These need to be included in an educational game we want to create sometime.
One more question. So I didn't realize, you said that, so they know the language of those pillaging and whatever those set things within the game are. Do you think that kind of puts a
Transfer.
barrier, puts a barrier on what kind of language they're gonna use? Is there a set type of speech, a set kind of number of words that they won't go outside of? So once they kind of know this, where do they go is the question for me?
Sure. These are the norms of the community where players get together. They gather around these in the game. That's their shared goals. But there are lots of other creative expressions, constructions built around these notions. So it's not just, so yeah, that's a very good question actually. So how can we be sure if this language they learned can actually transform or transfer to other non-game settings, which we expect them to be using language for actually. So we can't go out and just talk about pillaging. Right. But the language created around these shared game related concepts and elements is actually real life language, which was about 13% of the communications in the game, which it was based on a limited, a portion of, chat messages we extracted. There's certainly more than that. Thanks. Sure.
When your participants were playing synchronously, were there other players in the same server interacting, or was it a private game with just your 4 participants?
So this data was collected in Discord actually.
Okay.
And in Discord you can create channels with faction members being included. So no, that was just a private channel that the faction members were all part of.
Okay.
But we focus on the language produced by the protagonist and the other 3 participants.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sure.
I was just gonna say I really appreciate the way that you pointed out very specific literacy skills that people are doing. I feel like that's kind of related to some of my own research, is thinking about gaming as literacy, and how this kind of models entering a discourse community.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually wondering, do you guys already have your where you're going to be publishing this article? Where can I draw from it in the future?
Of course. We have some places, some venues to submit it to. So, the Journal of Virtual Worlds is where we're going to try. We are not sure if it's going to be actually published there, but there are several computer-assisted language learning journals also in the field which we are going to probably submit to. But our first option is going to be probably Journal of Virtual Worlds. It's a non-profit, so free journal with all sorts of articles related to gaming and their application in education. Thank you for sure. Sorry, Mom is sitting there. Okay, if there is any question specifically for Mom.
I have a question for you. Actually, 2 questions. How did you go about choosing this specific MMO? And is there a reason maybe why? And then do you believe that maybe this could be reapplied to de novo or in a new situation with language learners who have never been an existing gamer and using it as an additional tool to augment their language learning and kind of learning that and getting more language skills?
Sure. So the choice we made was basically based on my 5 years of gaming and playing in this game. So then we met Mohammed, and so he took over. So some of our communal work. But I personally played this game for 5 years before coming to the US. So I had access to a lot of data, and I was an active, competent player of the community too, so I knew people, I could contact them, I could elicit their accounts, their stories. So most of it resulted from my own positionality. So also this specific game was considered to be, was recognized as the #1 downloaded MMO in 2010, I believe. So we need to check, and yeah, the statistics, the survey conducted is out there. So we thought that let's combine these. So this game has been played by most gamers out there, and I have been playing it too. So I have access to lots of data. I have access to high ranking players in the game, so why not to conduct a research on that. So, and the idea of this study was not this specific game. We were just wanting to know how the notion of communities of practice and legitimate peripheral participation works in an online community like this specific MMO.
So again, though, but regarding just a new application, say you have a classroom of English language learners who are looking for an additional way to maybe augment their acquisition, do you think it would be applicable to kind of take maybe this whole spin, not necessarily this game, Struggle of Kingdoms, but introduce them to an MMO which would allow them contact with an English-speaking community online that might help them improve in the classroom?
For sure, yeah. There are actually some different stories around this. Some believe that gaming is a waste of time. So some also believe that gaming is the future of education. So I personally subscribe to the idea that gaming is the future of education, and children or students, players, learners basically just attend games and play games more actively than they attend classes. So, and what do we want? So while they attend their classes with hesitation sometimes, so mostly sometimes, so they attend games and spend long hours of gameplay outside their classes. So if we can make some form of shift in our education system to have games as virtual classes, so, and at the same time that they're engaged in the gameplay, we communicate to them their to educational aspects of educational ideas, educational teachings, so why not? So we can use games in our education too. Thanks for attending our session, and please feel free to contact us for data or our paper, future paper, hopefully. Thank you. Please.